Man, it breaks my heart when I think about it. I took the kids and I took them over to her parents, my in-laws, and I dropped them off. And this is in April of 2020, and I did not see them again until September of 2020, a month after I got sober, and I'm willing to sacrifice everything in my life for what I need.
It's one thing for somebody to grow up with a genetic predisposition for addiction, but it's a whole other slew of adversity and difficulty that someone has to deal with when their basic needs and security of living life and having running water or enough food to eat or shelter is not present. On this next episode, we're going to hear from somebody who was faced with all of these extreme adversities and eventually fell into extreme alcoholism and addiction, yet managed to find his way out and build a life of recovery. We're really excited to be having this conversation with Zach Gabriel, who is one of my dear friends and also is a professional that works for a treatment program, A Mission for Michael. I think you're going to love this episode and you're going to want to hear it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this month's episode of Finding Mental Wellness. I am your host, Taylor Brown. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Zach Gabriel, who's not only a good friend of mine, but also somebody that works in the space and industry of behavioral health, A Mission for Michael. So Zach, thanks a lot for taking the time to hang out with us today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's always good just to hang, even if it's on a screen for a little bit.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. All the technology nowadays, right? It can sometimes be easier to do this style of things. But yeah, so we've gotten to have a lot of really interesting conversations on this podcast so far with different professionals varying from, therapists to owners to medical professionals, other individuals that are just sharing their personal experience. And I think that you have a really unique experience yourself, both from a personal standpoint as well as being a professional in the field that works to, work with the community and let people know what resources are available to individuals or their family members who are suffering. And a pretty unique point as well, A Mission for Michael, an outstanding company, really remarkable, right?
It really is.
It is. It's a phenomenal company and treatment program, right? But it's interesting because they have like pretty much the same services that MRC offers. The only thing is that they also help adolescents. So I think that can, lead us into some really interesting conversations today. And I would love to touch on that more. In fact, just another quick little tidbit. We actually worked with A Mission for Michael, and they allowed us to come tour their programs before we opened our own mental health. And that was pretty amazing. I remember working with Danielle and talking, getting permission from Jacob to be able to do that. And they were so easy to work with, just humble, down to earth, real. And we're like, listen, we don't know how to do this. We hear that you're really good. Can we come tour and check it out? Because if we're going to do this, we want it to be, close enough to the best people that are already doing it. And they were really, really accommodating and helpful in letting us tour the facilities and see it. So that can be a rare thing in today's day and age with treatment programs, like working nicely together and trying to help others. So, yeah, just a shout out to AM/FM. It's an incredible company. But yeah, so obviously I know you, we're close friends, and I know you have experience, right, in recovery. And I think that's probably the first thing I really want to dive into is if you wouldn't mind telling your story. You can be as detailed or as high level as you'd feel comfortable with.
I like how you started about talking about, all the people that you've had on the podcast and therapists and stuff like that. And then it's like segue. And then here's Zach, and I just think that's great. I love that.
You bring a wealth of information and experience.
For sure. And I just really appreciate our friendship and what we have personally. And then all the things that Midwest does in our community is just awesome, and trust you guys 100%. And it's just awesome, to be able
Thank
to
you.
work in this space, but also build real personal relationships outside of work and be with like-minded people, and just put my life at the exact right time, so I'm so grateful for that. Yeah. And, my story is, I grew up here in Kansas City, only child, and, went to Shawnee Mission North, I was, a straight A kid in, you know, um, all of the, I don't want to say like, the upper classes, I was taking all of those sort of things and just really loved schoolwork and baseball was my passion. And I just kind of stuck with that. I was a really shy kid. I made friends really easily and connected with, people. But the things that were going on inside of my home, kind of kept me isolated to make sure that things at home were okay. Being an only kid, I kind of took that responsibility of myself of like, I got to make the peace at home, and kind of grew up in a chaotic environment and no fault of either one of my parents. I love both of my parents so much. And, after getting sober, being able to make amends with them and have the relationship I have with them today, you would never know, that my growing up and all the things that were happening throughout my alcoholism and addiction were ever present. It is such a beautiful thing to have that transformation in my life. But it kind of manifested certain things in me, certain characteristics of how I handled stressful situations and all these things. And I really hated alcohol. I grew up, with a front row seat of what that looked like, and the destruction that it can cause and that pain, I felt that, so I was really against I was a good boy, I really was. And I tried my best to do that. And, you know, it was one basketball game in high school and hanging out with my buddies, and I knew what they did after those events, and for whatever reason that night I asked them if I could come hang out with them, and they were like, yes, come with us, and I was like, all right, I guess I'm doing this. And we walked into this house party down in this basement, and I could hear the loud music and the yelling and the laughing and carrying on, and I kind of grew up in a bar, like my dad would pick me up from school and then I would go to the bar with him and play pool and hang out with his friends and stuff like that. So I was like, that atmosphere was comfortable for me, and I walked into that party and there was, I played varsity baseball. I was very fortunate to be pretty decent at baseball, so I was a part of that kind of circle. And there was all these varsity football players, all the quote unquote cool kids, and they were like, Zach's here. What's good? And handed me the shot of 10 high whiskey. And whew, I took that shot and, you know, I hear people talk about all the time, like, it made me funnier and I could talk to girls and I could talk to, I could dance, all this stuff. What it did for me was it put me it shot me in the present moment. All these fears, all these anxieties, all these thousand different voices going on in my head all the time vanished at once. It was magic, you know, and I don't really know what happened that night. I'm a blackout drinker, Yeah, yeah, and, it was awesome, and I to this day, I tell people, I'm in a 12-step program, that, I tell new guys all the time, it's like, I love drugs and alcohol. I still do. you know what they enabled me to how I could live my life, was my first love, and it was the love for a majority of my life, um and without consequences, there's no way that would I would still be doing it, but the moral consequences, the spiritual consequences, the you know external consequences of like, hey Zach, you're gonna maybe go to prison, like that's not good.
That'll stop you in your tracks.
I don't think I'd do well in prison, and I had to face that reality, later on.
I wanted to chime in real fast. So it's really interesting. I actually tell people sometimes when I'm thinking back on why I loved drugs and alcohol so much. I mean, beyond the simple fact that genetically I'm wired for addiction, right? But I think what it did is some people will say, oh, it was like liquid courage or it made me feel all these different things. And that's true. But what I most relate to, what you said was like the biggest truth for me is it made me present in the moment. I was completely present. I was like devoid of insecurities, ego, overthinking things, fear. I was just completely in the moment and not worried about shame or judgment from others. And I think that's what it was that I remember thinking to myself when I first drank. I had a very similar experience. I drank some whiskey and or probably a few hard alcohols mixed into one solo cup, like a real good little young teenager, preteen. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I feel so incredible and life is kind of hard, right? Like, probably harder than from an emotional standpoint, just feeling confused and displaced and not a part of. I remember thinking, like, oh, shit, this is what people are doing. This is what they do. They just take a shot every now and then. Like, I genuinely thought that. I thought, oh my gosh, so I just need to like drink every now and then, and that's how I'll feel okay. And I'll be able to be present, like you said. Um, that's just, I can relate to that so, so much at such a deep level. So I'm glad you brought that up. And you were getting into some other stuff that really, it's such a similar thing. Like when you talked about kind of being in love with it, like when I try to describe my addiction, to alcohol and drugs, everything. It was a romantic relationship. It really was. And I romanced it like as I was getting into it, I thought that it was like this, I don't know. Everything about it to me was so attractive and I wanted it and it gave me that comfort and ease and being okay in the moment. So I completely relate to that.
What you're talking about is that emotional hard. My life really wasn't that hard. I mean, I grew up in Johnson County. I mean, we didn't have money or anything like that, but I went to a good school. We had a house, I had everything that I needed, but it was emotionally challenging, to navigate through, Um, and so, you described that perfectly of what my experience was like, and from that moment forward, I really put some sort of substance in my body every single day, whatever that was. And it quickly graduated. I mean, it escalated pretty quickly. And, I'm a senior in high school, and a lot of the things at home kind of, went downhill pretty quick. And, my parents divorced senior year in high school. I stayed living with my dad. This is the height of the housing crisis, in 2008. So that can kind of give everybody a time frame on how old I am, which if you ask my kids, Isaiah and Josephine, they think I'm old, which is cool. I love it. I can't wait to get old. You know what I mean? It's cool. And I stayed living with my dad, and obviously difficult times throughout the country. And we didn't have running water or heat or electricity or any of that stuff. And being there with my dad while he was going through this emotional process of my mom leaving, um and me, staying with him through this. And, by this time I've graduated to, Oxycontins and, using, IV, injection of Oxycontin.
Into the really, really hard stuff.
Yeah, 17 years old there. And, my mom had gotten remarried immediately and was pregnant with I have a half brother, Joshua, now who's 17. He turns 18 in August. And, it was a wild time, man. I just did not know what to do, so I just relied heavily on these substances to numb all of this stuff. And like what you were talking about earlier is I didn't worry about yesterday and I wasn't worried about tomorrow. I was just focused on what I needed to do for myself in that moment to be able to survive. I really believe for me it was a survival mechanism, a survival thing of where if I wasn't doing that, who knows what would have been going on.
Kinda numbing the pain or maybe the lack of control or the lack of structure or the fear, the uncertainty, like, almost a way of, like, medicating that, I would imagine.
And I remember my buddy, we were hanging out in places that we hung out at, and he made this comment and he was like, "Yeah, Zach definitely uses for a different reason than we do." And I remember that so vividly because I was like, he is right, and I wasn't really aware of that. I was just kind of, this was my life now. I really couldn't put the pieces of the puzzle together on what was driving that.
What were you doing to, like, take showers and, like, eat? I mean, what did that look like?
It's really kind of all of a blur, to be quite honest with you, but, we took little bird baths, we'd get water and we'd do things. And, my really good friend still to this day, his parents, were like my parents kind of during that time, Carol and Steve, and they would, I'd go over there and they'd let me shower, and then I had another family, Joe dated a girl that was in my class, and I would go over to their house and they would take care of me, let me shower, and so I had so much support outside of that where, that was my living condition, but also I had so much love in my life, and so many, I call them little angels that just appeared, um, during that time.
Wow, that had to be tough and tough for your dad too. It sounded like he was going through a tremendous amount of like probably stress and distress and sadness and grief and confusion and his own adversity and cross to bear, so to speak. You know what I mean? So it's probably hard for him to even be there for you or even notice if you were not doing well.
Man, it really was to see, my dad kind of in that place. And I remember that phone call, I was off doing whatever I was doing, and he called me, you know, I could tell on the phone how difficult this conversation was for him. And he just called me and said, "You need to come get your stuff. The sheriffs will be at the house in like 2 hours. And if whatever we can't get, you know, it's going to be taken. The house is being taken over, and obviously I couldn't make it down there, and so I pretty much lost everything that I had at that time. And, my dad was homeless for quite a while, living in a tent. And, I'd go over there and visit him and bring him stuff. And, all the while I have all this other stuff going on. And man, that quite an experience for sure.
How old were you when you got that call from your dad?
I was 18.
Geez. So were you still in high school? Was it your senior year?
I was like the youngest kid in my class. So I graduated when I was 17.
Okay, I did too. So okay, so that's a little bit better because I'm thinking back, all your baseball stuff probably was gone, your uniform, all that memorabilia and regalia, all the stuff from that was like your life essentially.
Growing up, we went to Major League Baseball parks and minor league parks and stuff. That was our summer vacation. And I had a collection of broken bats and helmets and catchers, signed baseball, like baseball, I had a lot of stuff, of just my childhood.
Jeez, I can't imagine what that did to you as a young kid on like your security needs, and how much that impacted you. And gosh, to have to go visit your dad I mean, he's clearly going through his own version of hell, right? And emotional, mental health, whatever's going on there that was eating away at him. That just had to be so difficult and painful. I mean, you probably didn't have a therapist or anything like that back then, I'm guessing. I mean,
I had a few choice words for them, to kick us off, set that relationship off on the right start, and just never talked and never went back. So my mom was there to try to help me the best she could, but she was going through her own stuff too. She, after getting sober and having this relationship with her and making amends and having those really meaningful, deep conversations with her, the guilt that she carried that for a long time. And it wasn't until, I got sober and we started to mend our relationship and now where it's at today, I tell her, quite frequently if things come up, like, I understand, I understand. I couldn't imagine, the position you were in to make a choice for you and your life. She made the best choice for her and her life moving forward. And, when we make difficult choices in life, it's not just a black and white deal.
That's so true. That's incredible for you to be able to understand both your parents with such reverence and respect and showing them grace, because that's an awful lot for a kid to experience, that shaped you, probably gave you some trauma, very likely, and um, wow, that's powerful. Okay, so take me back. So you're 18, your dad's like, we they're coming to take the house. And so where were you at in your life at that point? Is that when you got into the banking job? Let's pick back up at like 18, right as he was telling you that.
18, by this time I'm, using heroin every day, drinking every day. I'm living with four of my buddies in a one bedroom apartment. I'm not really, I don't have any direction. I'm working, but my money's gone as soon as it hits my hands, and I'm just kind of drifting, and when all that was going on, I can't really say that I made this conscious decision of like, I need to do something for myself, like, I don't, I don't think I really had that. I think I just got lucky. I think I just got lucky, in the sense of, during all this time too, I, have already gotten 2 DUIs. One of my favorite things to do is get blacked out and drive a vehicle.
I had the same bad habit, Zach.
Oh, and just like by happenstance, a couple of those times I wake up in a jail cell and, I'm like, how did I get here? And one time I woke up in this cell, and the guy came up to me, the sheriff, and was like, all right, all right, boy, it's time for your call, and I'm like, okay. And he's like, is it a local call? And I'm like, yeah, of course it's local. And I tell him the area code of 913, and he just drops his head and shakes it, and he's like, that's not local. And he was like, where do you think you are? I'm like, Overland Park, like, probably. And he was like, you're in Ottawa, Kansas, which is
Oh,
like
wow. An
an hour.
hour away,
Yeah.
hour
You
south.
know,
That's a good
yeah. Yeah.
drive.
That's a good drive,
Wow.
and
Wow.
so, but I really feel like I got lucky during this time. I had a good friendship with, a girl, that was my buddy's Joe's sister who I would always hang out with, and she was at college and I would go visit her. And, we started we turned our friendship into, more of a dating relationship and stuff like that. And I had to do about, you know, 6 months in the work release program after all of this happened with the DUIs. And obviously, I can't pass a P test. So I'm like violating probation, and all that stuff. So I got separated from heroin and stuff at that time. And then when I got out, I would just drink and I would, I'm like, this is totally fine. And I had an opportunity to go work for this title company in the mortgage business. And I was there for a year. And then really this bank took a chance on me. I was probably, I was 20, and didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know this would lead to this, successful career, any of that. I was just taking the next thing that was right in front of me, and it turned into almost a decade long, you know, banking career that I just loved. I think God just took care of me, with that.
Well, I think that you've been through a tremendous life at that stage, even for you now, but at that stage, you've been through so much adversity. And I think that that kind of creates such depth of character and resilience to push through and to hang in there and to be grounded and to have a level of gratitude, but also to be able to not shy away from further adversity and kind of stick it out and figure out what's going on. But well, thank God for that. I mean, golly, man, you didn't have a whole lot of structure. So, did your mom ever like beg you to go back living with her at any point in time?
Oh yeah, all the time, but I had so much resentment towards her, and there was a period that I did land there for a little bit, but I was so um just defiant. I didn't want any part of that. And, her husband that she married, me and him had a very rocky beginning to our relationship. And that is solely on me. I made that a living hell for them, and I put all of my effort into making them know how I felt. And today, another part of this process of amends and just how that transformation can happen is me and him have the greatest relationship. He is a great guy. And even during our rockiness and all throughout those years, he was behind the scenes supporting me, supporting my mom, being that rock. Even if they had difficulties because of what was going on with me, he was just trying to help me, because he knew no matter what was being presented in my behavior, that's not who I was. He believed there was something deeper, and he could see that.
Wow. Man, that's gonna make me emotional. That's a powerful thing, to be a step parent. I mean, because I'm a step parent, and it is a tall order, right? To learn how to what is your position and what you don't want to step too far past what you're able to do. You know what I mean? Because you're not the biological parent, so you want to be careful to not overstep, but also you care so much, and you've been there for so long that you have that compassion, that love. But it can be a really difficult road. So I have a lot of admiration for him in your life. Okay, sorry to keep detracting you. This is all very interesting. So let's go to you had just gotten the job at the bank.
We got our first rental house. It was off of the Paseo, and it was like $500 a month, and we're doing great. We're doing great, dude. We're partying and
Your
having a
connects and
ball.
plugs were right down the street on the same
Yep.
block, I bet.
Yep. We're having a ball, and man, life was good, really. I mean, for me, I was with this woman and I started this job and had some money. And, we eventually moved to downtown Overland Park, and we got married. And, you know, uh, you know, Chuck Nasty from 101 The Fox, that DJ, he's really good friends with my dad. So he was our DJ. And it was just like a big party, and life was just going just fine. I couldn't have been happier. And, Heather got pregnant, a couple months after we got married and came back from our honeymoon and stuff. And so that's when Isaiah was born. I got married when I was 23 and Isaiah was born when I was 24, and I can remember just going through this internal struggle of like, I do not want my kids to have to experience the same things that I experience, so I was really torn. Still wasn't using drugs, just drinking. And, but I just was scared, of being this father and, making sure that I provide a good life for this kid, this little baby, and Isaiah was born the day before the Royals won that wild card playoff game. And so I'm in the hospital with him, pushing him around while the Royals are playing and they won and then eventually went to the World Series and all that stuff. And that was one of the greatest times of my life because I was, just had a baby, all these things are going well. And I'm going to all these games, and Heather was terrified because I was out late. I was drinking and driving. I was not doing what a new father should be doing, and she really had like an ultimatum with me of like, stop drinking or, this isn't going to work. And so that was my path of like starting to choose or be trying to get sober, and her granddad was sober for 35 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was a great guy. And I can remember going to his birthday celebrations and being around these people. I'm like, this is sad. These people can never drink again, and this is depressing.
That's really how, but that's how we thought back when we were still sick and immature. And for those listening and watching, when we laugh like this and we talk about things that probably sound insane to somebody who's not an alcoholic, that is our way of kind of coping with the fact that we can relate on something that we now know is horrible, but it's just the way we're wired, right? So, okay, so you had gotten a taste of like being around him celebrating his years in AA, and you're like, man, it's a death sentence, right? Like it's a jail sentence.
That first 30 days, I was really like, I'm not drinking, and wow, was I miserable. I hated everything about life. My skin crawled. I could not function or move or, the life of me had been taken away. You know, the love of my life had been ripped away from me and I could not bear it. And from that moment, like I knew what happened when I drank is I would really have good intentions of like being a real chill guy and having a few beers and just hanging out. But, that's what I had this idea in my head. But really, I take a drink and I am gone. I am a maniac, crazy person, and I'm not like mean or violent or any of that stuff. I'm just missing in action. I'm out, and I'll come back later.
That's how I was too. I can relate. I would black out all the time, and I don't even know what I was doing.
And that's when I started using drugs again because I knew I could function on it. I knew I could get the relief that I needed. You couldn't smell it. I could hide it, and get everything that I needed, but also take care of my other responsibilities, go to work, be a dad, try to be a good husband, I mean, like, just, for the record, I wasn't that great of a husband.
Kind of goes without saying, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's when I started, with the drugs again. And I continued that until, I eventually, you know, landed in my however many treatment center and started on this new journey of recovery and path forward.
And well, and that you bring up an interesting topic that I'd like to kind of again detract a bit. There's a lot of people that get very uncomfortable when they go to detox the first time or go to treatment, and that just the idea of getting off their drug of choice, if you will, which is a fancy way of us saying whatever substance you are really abusing, right? I was a poly substance user. I did multiple things all at once, but the one I liked the most when it came to like experiencing withdrawals from that, it was so uncomfortable that the only thing my mind was thinking about was what substance can I put in my body to cope with this that won't be this uncomfortable when I have periods of time of not using it, you know? And to me, it was like, it made all the sense in the world. It was like, it was obvious, like, well, I have to do this. I have to get something else that still feels good, but doesn't cause this much pain and destruction and damage to my body. Looking back, it's so wild to me how insane I was, how much my life and my entire reality completely revolved around putting substances in my body, you know, but it was in every way, shape, and form. And I had moments where I was more productive from using certain drugs. It was really strange. I mean, I would do heroin or oxy and I wanted to work. I wanted to go study or do things. And then the problem was I couldn't help overshooting the mark and I would eventually nod out or I would be rendered about useless because again, I was trying to, it's as crazy as it sounds. I was still trying to be a good person and trying to be present and trying to be there for others and my responsibilities. I just wanted to take the edge off. I just wanted to feel good. And I loved that feeling so much that as I went through different types of withdrawal from different drugs, I would always go to the next one. Like, well, surely I can do a little bit of Xanax, or surely I can do a little bit of Oxy if I just keep it contained, or I could drink a little bit, or I can do this, or I can do that. um, it's a very lonely, scary black hole of an existence when you're really at that stage of trying to um, like negotiate with your addiction.
It's a very interesting relationship. I think that's what I hear from you is this relationship with that we have with these substances is just like this internal conflict of I need you, but I don't want you, but I need, and it really did propel me. It was fuel for me to achieve the things that I, was able to achieve in my life. Truly.
That's so interesting. Okay, so back to your story. So you're working, you have a life, you're not being the best present father and husband, and you tried to quit the drinking for like a month. You were miserable, and you eventually went back to the heroin to try to use controlled amounts to get that euphoric feeling that you were craving and try to remain functional. What happens next?
Josephine was born 3 years later, at this time, I've kind of moved up in, my career and, Heather had a great job. She's a scientist, and, honestly, we bought our house and everything from the outside looks great, really. And Josephine's born. And I mean, there is so much chaos in the home because of my behavior, and I would disappear, you know, and not show up for 5 days. And then I would, go to AA and all while still using, but I'm trying to play this game of like appeasing everybody and I want to get better. I just don't know how. At this stage in my life, I'm not really willing. Not enough has happened for me to be, I wasn't able to be honest and say, I just want to keep using. And so I was really fighting, you know, fighting like what you were talking about of I want to be a good person, but I also need this in my life. And while I'm using this, I can't be that person that I truly want to be. And I really think I am, and so, we're raising our kids and I keep getting promoted at work and going on to
That's
bigger and better
amazing that you were able to
things.
function like that for that much, for that long. That's truly incredible. And again, this is for our audience, our listeners, our viewers. Somebody with severe addiction can still function in some capacities. And this is what makes it difficult to call it out, to set those rigid boundaries and to hold them accountable. There may be some aspects of someone's life who's struggling with addiction that does seem still together, that does seem still functional, that maybe they even can succeed, right? The fact that you're getting promoted and doing well at work is like, it's a miracle. And thank God, because you're able to provide for, help provide with your wife and for your kids and all of that stuff and get a home and everything. But meanwhile, your soul was just kind of rotting and dying on the inside, and the emotional turmoil you were causing with the family. So that's why usually when we are talking to a family, and Christian, our admissions director, and the team, they're amazing. They'll talk to people, and once you start to ask the right questions, the right open-ended questions to let them feel safe to tell you what's been going on, you'll eventually peel back those layers and go, well, that's not normal, right? It's not normal to not be home for 5 days. That's pretty bad, right? So in terms of like the interactions that you would expect from a husband or a father, and so, but at the same time, you excelled exponentially. You climbed a ladder in a difficult industry of it was banking, right? You climbed up in a very competitive industry that which is incredible to me. I still don't even understand how you were able to. I was working at a gym when I was using heroin, and I would fall asleep at the check-in desk, and people would make fun of me and laugh at me. But that's incredible. But I mean, again, like, thank God that something up there was looking after you to be able to maintain some semblance of like normalcy for your kids, right? At least some of the security of a home and food on the table and all of that, because any more of an absence of your abilities could have been a lot more difficult.
I just have to chalk it up to God, like what you're alluding to is just like I was just taken care of, and that's why I just say I was lucky, because I don't know how I did that, but that was just my experience, and up until a certain point, right? And Heather and I started seeing this couples therapist, and you know, I couldn't play my game on her. She knew what was up. I could not maneuver around this lady.
So some of those therapists are really good at what they do, right?
I had 3 interventions in 1 month, you know. And you watch that intervention show, and here's what I think. I'm watching this show and I'm like, these people have to know an intervention's coming. They can't think that they're so important that these cameras are following them around and just like, and so that happened to me. I wasn't on a show or anything, but like first time getting an intervention, like, okay, you got me. But they tricked me 3 times,
Wow, in the same month.
in the same month. And I broke this therapist's door. I mean, I, used my middle finger to my whole family and stormed out and cussed them out and told them that they're the problem, slammed her door, broke it, and, and she, was like, I have this opportunity for you to go to this new treatment center in Oklahoma City. I know the executive director, and you can go there for free, because they're scholarshiping people because they just opened and there's not a lot of people there, and this is a great opportunity. And my response was, first of all, I don't need your charity. I have a job. I have insurance. I don't need your gift, essentially, you know. And then 2, I was like, couldn't you send me to someplace cooler, than Oklahoma City? Like, can we like find a different plan? Like, this just doesn't work for me, you know? And I had just started this new job with this organization, and they had no idea what was going on. I've heard the speaker talk about this one time, and he's like, people like us, can jump out of a 4-story building, land on our feet in a 3-piece suit, and land the best paying job that we've ever gotten in the midst of the worst piece of our alcoholism or addiction. And that was me. I just got this job and it was all this stuff. And I was sitting at work and I just had this feeling. I was like, I think I'll go, you know, I think I'll go to this treatment center. And, I told my family, I said, the world will collapse with me going to treatment. Your world will stop spinning, like, and I'm serious at this time. I'm not even paying my own bills, like they're going to be just fine. You know what I mean? And so it's 5 days into this treatment center stay, and I turn on the news and COVID happens and the world is shut down. And my response was, see, I told you. I go to treatment and the world gets shut down. That's how just delusional and ego and all these things. And I still get a crack up out of that. It was, yeah. So I finished that treatment stay, and, I came out of the, I mean, it was, I mean, I wanted to leave every single day, you know, I wanted to leave every single day, but I started using these tools that I had learned in treatment, and really came to this place. And there were so many people in this treatment center that were just like me and my age, that were like 5 years sober, and they were happy and like loved life. And I had never met anybody like that. I had never met people my age that was doing what I was doing, that were sober and happy about being sober. And they were funny and like had this life. And I was like, it was very attractive. And that gave me a lot of hope. I was like, okay, and I came back home and I'm like, I'm never going to use drugs or drink ever again. I'm going to go to AA and get a sponsor and work the steps and, you know, try to be a good husband, be a good dad, and, show up to work, on Monday at 8 a.m. I'm like, I'm going to do all these things, and that lasted about 5 days, you know. Um, yeah, Heather, she had hit her breaking point, and we had already started the separation process, and she wanted a divorce, and I had the kids with me when she told me that, and I man, it breaks my heart when I think about it. I took the kids and I took them over to her parents, my in-laws, and I dropped them off. And this is in April of 2020. And I did not see them again until September of 2020, a month after I got sober, and I'm willing to sacrifice everything in my life for what I need. I am willing to sacrifice it all, and I love those kids. They are amazing, and I am so fortunate to be their dad, but that's what happened.
That's addiction.
Um,
That's
yeah.
addiction.
hmm
Wow.
Yeah.
So you got sober in September.
I went back to that same treatment center in Oklahoma City, in August of 2020, August 10th. And, from that time that I left Oklahoma City until I showed back up, was 4 months, and when I originally showed up to that in March of 2020, I still had my job, the kids, I was married, money in the bank. I had a clean background check because I had everything expunged, And when I showed back up to that treatment center, I had 5 years of prison time hanging over my head. Multiple felonies, multiple misdemeanors, you know, um, I was served divorce papers and the sale of my house, like 7 days into that treatment center stay. I got a big old FedEx package, like this big, to the tech bubble. And, I just signed it. I just signed it, and that was the first experience, I think, of my sobriety where I let go. I was not willing to fight anymore because I could have gotten a lawyer and done all those things, but really my life was at stake, and me fighting that was not worth my life. And at that moment, I knew I was going to die if I didn't do this right at that moment, and it was serious. I was beat. I had been beaten, I was crushed. Um, in that moment. And, all of those things needed to happen for me to get to that place, you know.
Wow.
And I bounced in and out of a couple treatment centers too, in between that, and you kind of know the story about my little aviary escapade.
Yeah.
I was just very fortunate to show up back to that treatment center. And I went back to that treatment center specifically because of the people that worked there. There was something that attracted me to go back there because I needed to know what these people knew, you know? And for them, it was the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the big book and sponsorship. And it was very strong. Their recovery was very strong. And I, you know, there was a guy that came into that treatment center every Monday night and read that big book. And while I was getting prepared to leave, get discharged, I had already made the plan that I'm just going to stay in Oklahoma City and be surrounded by these people. And I asked that guy to be my sponsor. And, you know, I always say, all I did was I just read this book from 1935. And when it asked me to take action, I took action. When it asked me to pray, I prayed. When it asked me to write, I wrote. And, it's easier said than done, but really the fact is, and the truth is that's what I did.
It's very simple.
I followed that direction under this guy who guided me through all of that.
And we're still doing it today, right? Here you are. We're hitting meetings together, trying to help guys. We work in the field too. And wow, that's a really powerful story. And I'm glad you were able to share so much because it went longer than I had expected.
Sorry about that.
No, don't apologize. I would much rather have that. I'm sorry that we don't have as much time to go into kind of the work side of your life, but perhaps there's another episode where we can dig into your job and what you do and all the unique aspects about that. I do want our listeners and viewers to know that A Mission for Michael has adolescent treatment, as well as substance abuse and mental health. So that's something that we're very proud to get to be a partner with you guys and work together. But man,
Same
I
for
can't.
us.
Yes, it's amazing, but I can't thank you enough for your vulnerability and your honesty. I think a lot of people needed to hear what you had to say today in your story, and not just in a meeting where a speaker meeting, right, that we go to, but on a platform that I'm hoping a lot of people will listen to this and understand what recovery looks like and what it takes to get to the point of embracing recovery, right? So again, I cannot thank you enough for being on and for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Sorry I went on and on. I kind of tend to do that.
That's what I want. That's what we want on this podcast is we want genuine authenticity. We want realness. And it just gives us another chance. We can do another episode together and we can get more into AM, FM. But for now, for the time being, I think that everybody probably gained a wealth of information and knowledge about recovery and what it takes to be broken down enough to want to get better. And what I'd say is if anybody watching or listening, if you or a loved one have been through anything like what Zach was talking about or what I had talked about, or if you all are struggling, just know that our admissions team is available 24/7 at 816-597-1177. And we can also look forward to doing another episode with Zach where we can dive more into all the different types of services that A Mission for Michael provides so that there's even more resources available to this community that's listening. So thank you again so much for being on, Zach. I love you. I appreciate you.
I love you too.
That
Yeah,
was
you're the
awesome.
best.
I can't wait to do it again for take 2. But yeah, everybody stay safe, be healthy. And if you or a loved one are suffering, please don't hesitate to reach out, okay?